Welcome to the Social Restaurant Podcast. This is the weekly podcast where you'll find the brightest minds in the restaurant business sharing expert advice and insider tips on how their brands are building sustainable social media programs. I'm your host, Nate Riggs. Welcome back to yet another episode of The Social Restaurant. I am your host, Nate Riggs, and I'm glad to have you back here. Going to be a very interesting show this week, and I want to put things in perspective. So last week we were fortunate enough to have Jay Baer, Jason Baer, author of Youtility, a brand new business book that has topped the New York Times best-selling list. And Youtility is really about making your marketing helpful, helping your consumers and giving them a reason to come back to your marketing. It's marketing so useful that your customers would actually be willing to pay for it. And a lot of the case studies in that book, Jay talks about are apps. One of the apps that we mentioned last week was, again, this idea of Sit or Squat, the Sit or Squat app. You can go to sitorsquat.com and learn more about that app. But that's what we're here to talk about today is kind of the practicality of how does mobile fit into this picture of creating very, very useful marketing? Now, I want to put this in perspective for you because I think it's pretty crazy, and some of these stats were stolen out of the presentation that I saw for our guest today when he did it at Go Inbound in Indianapolis about a month and a half ago. But take into consideration that in 1990, we saw the launch of the World Wide Web. So in 1990, suddenly the internet becomes popular. By 1999, we're starting to see a major shift from print to the web. So from different types of ways to communicate information, marketing, sales, however, we're starting to see that now shift to the web in 1999. By 2000, there's about 500,000 websites, 500,000 websites. Fast forward now for the next 8 years to 2008, a monumental launch by Apple of the iTunes App Store. So for the first time, we're looking at the iPhone, we're looking at apps in general as a new way to use the web. By 2010, there's 500,000 apps in the App Store for Apple. And by 2011, we start to see that this trend towards mobile devices is not simply going away, and we're starting to see more proliferation of how people are using mobile devices in everyday life. We're at over 50% saturation in terms of smartphones. So that means that out of all the mobile devices out there today, more than half of them in the hands of consumers today are internet ready and have the ability to use apps. The time spent in terms of minutes per day, and this was as of June 2011, so this is right when the shift is happening, was over 100 minutes per day spent using apps or applications from a mobile device. Really interesting to see how this stuff comes. So today, I have an expert on board who I think is really one of the authorities in terms of this idea of mobile applications as a service. I don't want to waste no time introducing you to Santiago.
All right, Santiago, are you with me?
I am.
Excellent. Thank you very much for joining The Social Restaurant. I'm Nate Riggs, and this is Santiago Jaramillo from Indianapolis with BlueBridge Apps. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Oh, happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So we met at Go Inbound in Indianapolis, a conference that was put on by Element 3, a really great event, and I saw you do a presentation on this idea of mobile applications as a service. You went into that. Before we get into the content of the presentation, you kind of opened up that presentation with a little bit of your backstory, and I thought it was really, really compelling. Could you share a little bit of your background and how you ended up in America?
Sure, happy to. So I was born in Cali, Colombia. So the Andes in South America kind of split up just in Colombia, and they formed this valley. So you have kind of mountains on either side. And so I was born in this valley of Valle del Cauca was what it was called, but the city's Cali, and I lived just right outside the city for the first 9 years of my life. We used to go to this Catholic church every single Sunday, wouldn't miss a Sunday for like 8 years, and one Sunday we happened to not go to church. I was building a treehouse at the time, and the guerrilla, so the kind of militia armed forces came in, told everyone that there was a bomb in the building, ended up evacuating everyone into these two trucks and ended up kidnapping over 100 people that day. And so that was kind of a crazy thing that happened in our community. It was a really tough time, and my parents decided that that kind of environment and that level of insecurity and uncertainty wasn't a good place to raise their kids. So luckily, my parents were kind of blessed with owning their own business, so they just kind of picked it up, opened a new office in South Florida in Fort Lauderdale when I was 10, and we moved here, and kind of the rest is history.
So you come to America as a child. Obviously, you jump into the school system. You're faced with learning English. You end up going to college, and something hits you where you decide to start a few companies. What kind of companies did you start, and how did you choose to become an entrepreneur?
Sure. I think it comes with adaptability, right? Like, so my whole life has been about adapting. So being placed into this new environment that has changed, that is something that wasn't there before, and then learning how to sort of cope with it, right? Like remaining true to yourself, but also learning how to adapt to an environment in a way that you can not just survive, but thrive. And so for me, kind of starting businesses was kind of that. It was the fact that I was in a new country, didn't really know the language, so there was no rules for me, and that makes sense. There was no sort of, my parents went to this college, and that's, the college I've been going to for generations. It was kind of all wide open to me, right? And I kind of had to figure it out, because when we came here, my parents' English and the level of knowledge about the culture was very little, so I was kind of on my own in that regard. And so, instead of getting a job, I decided I'd start teaching music, and then that turned into, I started a few summer camps for kids in the summer, mymusiccamp.com. And so we ended up with 3 locations in 2 states. And then I did University Storage, which is kind of a moving and transportation company. And then after that, I worked for ExactTarget. Ended up, they just sold to Salesforce.com for like $2.5 billion. And so I worked with them in their Indianapolis office, and then as well in their Sydney, Australia office. And then it was when I was in New Zealand, after I had just kind of ended my stint with ExactTarget in Australia, that I was in New Zealand, and I saw mobile taking over the world, and that's when I started BlueBridge, digital BlueBridge apps, and that's kind of how we're here today.
So it's interesting, you say mobile is taking over the world, and I absolutely agree with you, and your presentation was chock full of a lot of stats that show that that's happening. But BlueBridge is a little bit different. You guys have a different take on mobile applications, one that you've kind of been coined as, and there's been some case studies, one particularly in the Journal of Technology Management of China, about this idea of mobile applications as a service. Now, this is a term that you've coined. So what does that mean?
Sure. Well, it's actually, I think, a natural progression of this technology shift. So what happens, right, like back in the late 90s, consumers started flocking to the web, right, to the internet. And all of a sudden, businesses said, oh my gosh, there's a lot of people online on these things called websites and this thing called the internet, right, accessing through the old AOL disks, right? And so then businesses said, well, heck, why don't, we should go to our customers, all right? Marketing 101, who's your target market? You go to where your target market is. And at first, those websites were very unwieldy, very expensive, and you didn't have this concept of this software as a service, which is, instead of building everything custom just for you, you can take advantage of some of the efficiencies that have already been created. And so really, a mobile apps as a service is a natural extension of mobile development. So we said, what if a business could buy an app that they didn't have to pay, $50,000 for the first time, and then 3 years from now it degrades slowly and they have to buy a whole nother thing again? But what if they could buy into a platform that gets better over time, right? So instead of a vendor and we give them an app and then Apple and Android change their code base and the app breaks, all of a sudden they're coming back to us and we have to charge them again. What if we split up the cost of the app on a monthly subscription basis, so that we could always be optimizing, improving, maintaining, and bug fixing their app all included? And so we coined this term mobile apps as a service, and it was a very natural extension of software as a service, and that was the business model that I was super familiar with. And we wrote that case study, it submitted to the journal, and they thought it was kind of interesting enough. So it's kind of a fun place to be, I think, coining a term that's going to be around for a really long time, because I think it's the only way that mobile development really makes sense with how much these platforms are changing and so how dynamic the landscape is. I think only something like this is a good decision for a business as far as how they invest in their mobile strategy.
You make a really good point that, you and I remember the AOL disk. We were kids when all this stuff was happening, so we've grown up with this. And yet we saw applications as a service or software as a service kind of really take hold in the late 90s, very early on in the late 90s. and then carry on through the 2000s, and now it seems like just about everybody is moving towards some type of service-based software delivered via the web or the cloud, and that's what's happened to the industry. So that took maybe, about 10 years?
Yep.
It seems like mobile's accelerating at a faster rate. So what's your projection in terms of how long it's going to be before mobile applications as a service really becomes the de facto standard?
Sure. I mean, I think it's already happening, right? Like in specific industries, it's already happened. So one of our big brands for our organization is Visit Apps, and we do tourism apps. And so we are kind of the biggest, actually, tourism app provider in the world right now. And so when somebody in the tourism industry is looking for an app, are they going to get something custom just for them developed, and it's going to cost them $80,000 and it's going to take them tons of money to keep upgrading? Or are they just simply going to buy into something that is going to be hundreds or thousands of dollars a month? They're probably going to do that. So I think it's already becoming the de facto standard for a lot of organizations. And I think what you start to see with mobile is that this shift of mobile is not going away, in the sense that we might have different form factors, as in like Apple may come out with a watch, right? And that's how we interact with our smartphone, where Google Glass might take on, right? And we all are walking around with glasses, but at the very core, those are mobile devices, right? Like by the very definition, we are carrying those. And so we are platform and form factor agnostic. We don't care what the device is. We just want to enable businesses and organizations to take advantage of this mobile revolution. The fact that we have these super computers in our pockets that we can access, that we've never had that kind of access to information before.
It is really amazing, and you bring up specifically Apple devices. I recently went from Android back to an Apple device.
Yeah.
And so I'm carrying an iPhone now, iPhone 5. Something you said in your presentation at Go Inbound has stuck with me after all these weeks, and that's this idea. The statement that you made was, push notifications are the most underutilized tactic in marketing today. And ever since I've grabbed my iPhone, I've noticed that suddenly I do pay a lot of attention to these push notifications. When I see the number pop up on an icon in my phone, I typically click to see what's there. And just for the audience, a push notification is typically going to be some type of a message that pops up on your screen, whether it's in the center of the screen or a banner across the top, or even a number icon on the corner of an app that alerts you that there's some type of notification or message or information there for you. So you guys do a lot of work with push notifications. Tell me why you feel like it's an underutilized tactic.
Sure. So first off, it's not saturated, right? And so that's one big thing, is that a lot of companies don't really know how to use them well. And so there's just there's not very many companies that do it. And so when there's not a lot of companies that do it, the ones that do it well really shine, right? To where like everyone does email marketing well, right? Or at least they should. And so because it's kind of, I think we all agree that our inboxes are saturated. Now that's not saying that email marketing isn't effective. It absolutely is, right? But it's just a matter of how much opportunity there is. Like back in the days of the mid-2000s, if you had AdWords, right, or early 2000s, all these keywords were super cheap, right? But then as industries mature, those keywords get more expensive, and then there's less opportunity in the space. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing and most important part is that I think that as marketers, we have certain tools that we can use to segment our audiences. And the more segments that we have, and the more segmented and targeted, the more data that we have about someone, the more targeted we can communicate with them. And so we have this amazing tool set in our marketing tool belt now, which is location. Now, we've never had that before as marketers, right? We had, back in the 1916, the days of the Mad Men, when everyone was inside drinking whiskey and smoking cigarettes indoors and coming up with the new slogan for this big airline, right? All we had was words, right? Because it was going to be stuck to a billboard, and we couldn't control when people saw it, where people saw it. It was just there. And then, fast forward to the internet, right, into the digital revolution, and all of a sudden we've got the lever and the variable and the tool of time, right? So now we have content, and then we have time. We have real-time access to information. What mobile brings to the table, more specifically push notifications, is this concept, this extra third kind of tool, which is location. So what if you could actually communicate to someone specifically based on the context of their location at the right time with the right message? I mean, you get absolutely mind-blowing results. And so, for example, one way that that we're helping some of our clients do that is like the city of Gainesville, Florida, has 100,000 people at their University of Florida football games every single weekend, right? What if 5 minutes before the big football game ended, they sent a push notification to those people in that town or 10 miles away from the stadium and said, hey, when the game ends, there's going to be free appetizers in our arts and culture district. Like, right, imagine someone 5 minutes before the game ends, they get this very targeted, right, the right message. It's a good offer. It's at the right time. It's at the point of purchase, right, when everyone's kind of turning to each other and saying, hey, where are we going to go out to eat or where are we going to go out to drink, right?
Yep.
And then it's also at the right location. Like, you know that you're not sending that message to someone in Seattle who there's no way they could take advantage of that offer. So it allows you to have more data about someone, and the more data you have, the more you can segment. The more you can segment, the more targeted you can be, and the more targeted you can be, the higher your conversion rates will be.
So let's dig into this for a second. Obviously, my listeners are going to be a lot of folks who are very involved in chain restaurant brands.
Sure.
And what's interesting is you're looking at a marketing scheme where not only do you have brand marketing to go out, but what's the brand identity and the online sites and the messaging that surrounds the brand. But then that translates across franchised organizations down into individual locales. So from a push notification standpoint, what are some of the opportunities when you've got restaurants that are literally in hundreds of different locations at one point, knowing that you're trying to upsell and maximize the size of each guest check of every table that comes in the door?
Sure, that's a great question. So you've obviously, we're all familiar, especially in our industry, of lock and publish emails, right? Which is basically this idea that corporate has this email template that all its franchises or franchisees can send, but they can only edit this one piece of information, right? Everything else is locked, so it's brand compliant, so it has the right messaging, but then they allow them flexibility to customize one specific part of it with like that specific branch's location. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so that concept is great, right? Because it allows corporate to maintain their brand standards, right, and their consistency across their sort of customer interactions nationally. But then it also allows a specific branch, right, to have a specific message that's relevant to their specific customers within a certain geographic context. And so the same thing can be done with push notifications, as in what if you're a big sort of pizza chain, right? And you get all these people to download your big pizza chain app. All of a sudden you've got hundreds of thousands of people, maybe even millions of people as your users. And then you can expose functionality for push notifications to each of your branches to only send push notifications to people that are within sort of 10 miles of their specific location, right? And so at that point, you're building this massive community, but then you're able to message them in a very granular level because you essentially know where they are. Now, you can't tie someone's identity to someone's location, right? Like, you don't know that Bob Smith is at this specific time, but you know that there is a user that is here, and you can communicate to that user there. And so I think that's a massive, massive opportunity that kind of hyper local yet hyper national is something that you can achieve really well with push notifications because of how targeted you can be.
You know, as you're talking through this, I'm seeing this Venn diagram in my head, and what's really interesting is that I think for the first time with these mobile applications and in push notifications, you can have a centralized piece of adoption, i.e. one app that you can put marketing and dollars and advertising dollars behind and get millions of people to adopt, but now you can turn that into a decentralized tactic.
Exactly.
So that applies to restaurants that maybe have test markets where they want to test certain notifications. What else? What else in the store? What about upsell? Do you feel like there's an opportunity there with location and time to time an update that goes out, maybe promoting a certain menu item or a dessert, or have you seen anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, so you see, there's several plays there, right? Imagine being able to, if somebody has your app, there's some sort of loyalty program, right? It recognizes, since it's running in the background, it recognizes when you come within 100 feet of one of your locations. And what if it sends a welcome message or a special offer? Hey, and that's how you get people to download the app. You say, hey, if you download this app, whenever you come within 100 feet of our restaurant, you'll be entered for a drawing of one of our, discount packages. So it might be anything from a free side up to an entire pizza party for everyone, right? And it can be an interesting sort of mechanism to get people to not just download the app, but also to make it a fun sort of almost game, right? When they walk into your store, they don't know what they're going to win, right? That's something. I think this other concept of a second screen is really powerful. And so the fact that, for example, you could be watching an NFL football game, right, like the Super Bowl, and you have an app, you have an NFL app that is giving you, okay, this guy just sort of scored a touchdown, and immediately up on your screen flashes his biography, right, where he came from, what his stats were for the season, and it kind of amplifies the experience, the primary experience that you're having. So think about when you're sitting like in a restaurant, right, like how much more you can amplify the menu or the stories that you tell. And so what if there's a special dish that you are pushing, or if this specific chain is pushing locally sourced and locally produced, right? And what if in the app you get to tell the story of where those ingredients come from, or how much attention to detail is put into preparing this specific meal, or what was the inspiration of the chef that came up with this specific recipe. I mean, there's so many things as far as geofences that you could set up that toggle push notifications automatically, right, when you come within a certain distance, or even at the actual restaurant to really extend and amplify that experience, or maybe even upsell. Use it to get a specific dessert menu or drinks or something like that.
It's really interesting. You know, restaurants are accustomed to doing this type of thing in terms of, I guess you would call it push notifications on SMS. So my wife and I are fans of Hometown Buffet. She's a buffet person, so am I. And we like to take the kids. We signed up for Hometown Buffet's push notifications on their SMS, and I don't even know if that would be considered the same thing. About once a month, we get a message that it's free kids night, and it usually drives us into the restaurant. But it stops there. So what you're saying is that with an app, you can do essentially the same thing in terms of driving folks in the door, but it gives you so many more dimensions in terms of what you can do in the store while they're there.
Exactly. And what if the special offer is only unlocked when you're actually there? Right, it's almost taking a play from the playbook of car dealerships. Have you ever seen that tactic? And it works amazingly. The conversion rates are crazy, where they send you a black key in the mail, and then they tell you that it could open up one of the free cars, right? And you don't know, right, if the key's going to work or not. But it's this idea of it's kind of a game, it's kind of a prize. You don't know what's going to happen, right? And what if you had this special offer that only when you're in location you could redeem, and then the restaurant chain could actually track redemption rates, right, of those push notifications. And so it gets really interesting there. And the other nice thing about push notifications that SMS never really got, brands got it on SMS, as in like you can opt out of specific brand messages, but the reason it never really took off is because people see their text inbox as a very personal thing still, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's just kind of that's the direction that messaging technology went. I think really push notifications are really everything that SMS was supposed to be.
That makes a lot of sense. I think, you know, the key point here in all of the great insights that you shared is this idea of what if. You keep saying what if over and over, and I think that's a good lesson for restaurant marketers in that it's early on in the game for mobile applications as a service, and so really what if, you know, there's a lot of possibilities yet to be explored. So I want to go ahead and wrap up on that. Anything else you would have to add in terms of what restaurant marketers should be thinking about if they are exploring the idea of using mobile applications as a service, push notifications? What advice would you leave them with?
Sure. I think I would just really encouraging to keep exploring. There's a stat that's been actually around since 2011. It's very easy to look up. And it's the fact that the average smartphone user, which is now, I think, 60% of the entire U.S. population, the average smartphone user spends more time in apps than they do in the desktop, laptop, and mobile web combined. Right? It's the only technology that's fast approaching TV consumption. And so it's like apps are nearing on TV on how much time people spend in that specific channel. And so when that's the case, right, when people are spending more time in apps than in the entire web put together, that's the kind of opportunity that we all have and that we're missing right now if we don't have a mobile strategy. Because the fact is, like, the trends have already shifted to where the majority of people are consuming content through apps, and it's a question of where are they going if they're not going to your mobile presence, right? And so I think it's really due time, my biggest encouragement would be start somewhere. Just get a mobile presence, get a mobile budget in, because it is while it is the beginning of mobile applications, it is not the beginning of this consumer trend toward mobile. Consumers are already in mobile. It's just a matter of brands following quickly. And the ones that follow quickly, just like the ones that went online quickly, they're the ones that thrived, right, and survived and had a new digital channel through which they could sell to. And the ones that refused to adapt and the ones that refused to move from their old brick and mortar are the ones that are dying. And I think we're going to see the same thing, is that the company's success, every company's success in the next 5 to 10 years is going to be predicated on how well they are able to monetize mobile for their organization.
It's a very, very powerful way to close in terms of what really marketers should be paying attention to. So I want to thank you very much for your time today, Santiago. Real quick, where can we find you? Tell us a little bit about BlueBridge and Visit Apps, and how can people connect with you?
No, thanks. First off, thanks for so much for having me. It's been a blast chatting with you, Nate, and being able to share some of this. Thanks for having me. And on Twitter, personally, you can find me at Santiago Jara, and so that's SantiagoJara, and then BlueBridgeApps.com.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you very much. I'm Nate Riggs with The Social Restaurant. This has been Santiago Jaramillo, and we will be back next week.